You found it. Your home for the best content on your favorite team, the Fighting Tigers of LSU. Do us a favor, subscribe to the channel, leave your comments below, and be sure to smash that like button. 247 Sports earlier today ranked. Maybe we should polish off the feigned indignance from Sports Talk Radio guy of a random summertime list drop early. It's not summertime, it's only February. But 247 Sports did rank the coordinator hires of this offseason. And Blake Baker was on the list. I won't bury the lead there. But Blake Baker was on the list. He was third on this list, which consists of Bobby Petrino at 10th, Jeff Collins at North Carolina, 9. Elijah Robinson over at Syracuse, leaving Texas A&M. He's 8. Colin Klein at Texas A&M, the OC, number 7. D'Anton Lynn at UCLA, the new defensive coordinator who left UCLA for USC, who LSU will see in the opener. Andy Konelnicki out of Penn State, their new offensive coordinator from Kansas. Mike Denbrock over at Notre Dame is the new offensive coordinator. They have as the fourth best coordinator hire this offseason. Actually, the picture they have there is an old picture of Mike Denbrock from his previous stint at Notre Dame, where he looks very youthful, very big build hat right there, as a matter of fact, as well. And then one spot after Denbrock is where they have Blake Baker, LSU's defensive coordinator, who left Missouri to join LSU, going from one SEC Tiger to the other SEC Tiger. If you are curious, number 2 on the list was Tavares Robinson, leaving Alabama for Georgia as their cornerbacks coach, one of the best recruiters in college football as well. And the number 1 coordinator hire, as you might guess, is Chip Kelly, who left UCLA as their head coach to go to Ohio State as the offensive coordinator. So behind Chip Kelly and Tavares Robinson is where they rate Blake Baker, and a spot ahead of Mike Denbrock, who was a Broyles finalist this year, who led LSU to the number 1 offense in college football. So high praise there for Blake Baker. And you know, I think, we talked about the importance of the bowl practices for the offense and why that was so important. Remember, the importance of bowl practices now is no longer about the bowl game. Unless if you're in a New Year's Six or a playoff game, the bowl practice is more about the 15 practices as a preamble to spring. It's giving you a jump start for spring. For guys that are opting out of the bowl game, guys that are going pro, here's an opportunity for guys that are maybe going to compete for a job, take on a starting role, to have that opportunity for 15 practices and a game before you ever get to spring. So that was the benefit, right, for LSU in spring football, was you had 15 practices with Jaden having opted out. You had 15 practices in a game for Garrett Nussmeier to be the man, the unquestioned number 1 quarterback, and Joe Sloan calling plays, right? Now, we didn't know at the time that Sloan was going to be the permanent OC. But now with the benefit of hindsight, you could look and say 15 practices, Sloan is the OC, Nussmeier is the quarterback, let her rip. And that was a great benefit. The downside was that was 15 wasted practices with Matt House. Now, you weren't going to have hired Blake Baker then anyway, but that was 15 practices with Matt House and the former staff that didn't net you anything on defense, and it showed in the bowl game. You played Wisconsin and allowed 31 points to a team that was 95th in the country in scoring and 506 yards of offense to that Wisconsin offense, 378 through the air, 128 on the ground. That was a team that was 71st in passing offense and 61st in rushing offense, and they went all over you. So the bowl game was a waste defensively, which is why this spring is so important for Blake Baker and this new defense, because you got to maximize these 15 practices in spring and the spring game to hit the ground running in fall camp, because now the offense has a massive head start on the LSU defense. And there's somewhat of an overhaul of both, right? I mean, you're returning most of your offensive line, but you're losing, obviously, Jaden Daniels, the Heisman Trophy winner, 2 receivers that we all are assuming are going to be first-round picks. Half of your running back room is gone. So a lot of your production is gone offensively. Now, I think you still got a ton of talent there. So it's important spring is important for your offense, but it's critical for your defense. And, for Blake Baker coming in spring, you got to figure out a lot in your secondary. And I'm hopeful. Like, what I am hopeful for is that 2 of your transfers in the secondary really establish themselves. If I had to guess today, I would say there is not a single player in LSU secondary who has solidified a starting job. There is not a single player in LSU secondary who I could say definitively right now is a starter against USC in the opener in Vegas. Not one. Not one. I'm not guaranteeing you Major Burns is a starter. I'm not guaranteeing you Sage Ryan is a starter. I think there are some guys who have played a lot of football for you and some freshmen last year who you hope grew up a good bit. Maybe Ashton Stamps, who, as we learned, played injured last year and played a lot and played well, and they're excited about it, but I'm not guaranteeing that guy's starting. Kylan Jackson, they're very excited about his athletic ability and potential. But I want to see Jair Brown and Jordan Gilbert come out of spring and establish themselves. If I know Jordan Gilbert, who's a starter at Texas A&M, comes in and is your best safety from jump and he's a starter, great. That's one less question I have going into fall camp. If Jair Brown comes in and proves he's a number 1 corner, boom, one less question going into fall camp. That's my hope for spring with Blake Baker. But on top of that, man, you got to find depth on your defensive line. I mean, Brian Kelly told us last week they're going to move offensive linemen to the defensive side just so they have, as he said, to make it competitive. Just so they have enough bodies on the defensive line. And then maybe the biggest thing for Blake Baker in spring, on top of figuring out roles in your secondary, because he's your linebackers coach as well, you got to maximize Harold Perkins. You know what was amazing to me? I think this is going to surprise you when I say this, because I get asked about Perkins all the time whenever I do interviews in other markets. All throughout the season, people would say, hey, what's happened with Harold Perkins? Harold Perkins' production in 2023 was almost identical to his freshman season. Did you realize that? No, seriously, listen. I'm going to give you some numbers. You don't have to memorize them, but just as a for instance. As a freshman, Harold Perkins had 72 tackles. This last year, he had 75. Basically the same number of tackles. Freshman, 13 tackles for loss. Sophomore, 13 tackles for loss. Had the same number of TFLs. Freshman, he had 7.5 sacks. This last year, he had 5.5 sacks. I mean, he had 4 forced fumbles as a freshman. And by the way, the freshman year, 3 of those sacks came against Arkansas. 4 forced fumbles as a freshman, 3 forced fumbles as a sophomore. 3 passes defense as a freshman, 6 pass defense this past year. He had 1 interception each year. Statistically, Harold Perkins was the same guy. Doesn't it sound so bizarre? Because you're sitting there going, man, Harold Perkins vanished this year, and you're not wrong. He didn't routinely make the massively impactful plays, but the numbers are identical. His numbers his freshman and sophomore were the same. So why did he vanish if the numbers were the same? And I understand part of it, you're going to say, well, he didn't really emerge until the Ole Miss game. And you're right in part, but he played in every game as a freshman, and he played in every game this last year as a sophomore. So the number of starts were more as a sophomore than as a freshman, but the amount of time he was on the field and the statistics were identical. Literally 72 tackles to 75, 13 TFLs each year, 7.5 sacks as a freshman, 3.5 as a sophomore, or 5.5 as a sophomore, 4 forced fumbles to 3 pass defense to 6, 1 interception each year. Like, how did a guy have the same number of stats but look invisible? Blake Baker's got to figure that out. That may be his biggest question year to year. But it's cool to see one of the national outlets recognize Blake Baker, recognize the decision to bring Blake Baker to Baton Rouge, as 247 Sports did. To bring him back to Baton Rouge, I should say. But the work's just beginning. And the biggest question LSU has, aside from replacing the Heisman Trophy winner, which is massive, is we expect the LSU defense will be better, but the big question is, okay, how much better? Start to get that answer in spring. Hey, thanks so much for watching. Please leave your comments. I love to interact, and be sure to hit the red subscribe button below.